Hello everyone and most welcome to 1573 and start a new article. It's been asked for before about Feyerabend, and this is going to be a first introduction. We will get back to the Derrida text, so we'll sort of parallel them and see what sort of creative outcome we can have. And Feyerabend is rather different from Derrida, but there are also interesting similarities, as you will see. And in my eyes, his most accessible book is here handled by Gonzalo Munevar, and it is a soft way into Feyerabend's thinking. And I start now on the first page, Conquering Feyerabend's Conquest of Abundance. Gonzalo Munevar. One, introduction. In his posthumous book, Conquest of Abundance, Paul Feyerabend derides relativism and rails against the champions of incommensurability. This is not to say, however, that in the final years of his life, he turned against the philosophical stance that made him a philosophical hero to some, and a pariah to others. For Feyerabend's late thought arises out of the concerns he so deeply felt throughout his career. As for his style, in this last book of his, he is as provocative as he always was. Feyerabend's starting point is that the world presents to our senses and our minds a greater abundance than we could handle. Were it not for the fact that senses and minds are designed to simplify, as we indeed need them to, This need for simplification and abstraction has been carried further by Western science ever since it took its roots in Greece. All such simplifications are distortions of our experience. But that seems like a small price to pay when we consider how often they are useful. A problem arises, however, when scientists and philosophers take as real the impoverished environment that results from abstraction. To the detriment of many aspects of experience that enrich and make our lives worthwhile. Such a move by scientists and philosophers cannot be justified on either scientific or philosophical grounds. Relativism, however, is not a reasonable alternative to realism, for it too makes unwarranted assumptions about the rigidity of human culture. For similar reasons, Feyerabend argues incommensurability is a problem only for philosophers who insists on the rigidity of meanings. Moreover, what appear to be epistemological and scientific investigations surreptitiously make moral assumptions. ethics should thus be a measure of scientific truth. Now, what is a reasonable alternative to realism? An approach similar to Bohr's experiments, ideas, and models strongly interfere with nature, but they do not reveal how nature is independently of that interference. They only reveal how nature responds to that interference. I will do my best to explain Feyerabend's positions, although I will not be able to do justice to all his clever arguments, nor to his many interesting descriptions of the practice and the history of art, science, and philosophy. I will argue, nonetheless, that this is a significant book, that Feyerabend is right about realism, but that he is wrong about relativism. I will also deal with the problem of reflexivity. Isn't Feyerabend's account of human knowledge an abstraction after all? And therefore, if his arguments against abstractions are taken seriously, does he not undermine his own account? A similar difficulty may be raised about my own unavoidable simplification of Feyerabend's rich views. And I can also add that to my own take. I will simplify Feyerabend further down. So it is unavoidable to a certain extent. I should warn the reader that my task of interpretation is made all the more difficult because Conquest of Abundance is a fragmented book. Bert Terpstra, the editor, pieced it together from several incomplete drafts found amongst Feyerabend's papers after his death. As Feyerabend's widow, Grazia Burini, points out, Mr. Terpstra worked at this task with the attention and the selflessness of a restorer of an ancient vase. The book is divided in two parts. The first consists of the introduction and four chapters of the unfinished manuscript. A fifth chapter intended by Feyerabend was never found and was probably never written. The second part of the book consists of several essays on the manuscript's themes. I will generally concentrate on the unfinished manuscript and draw on the essays from the second part for support. Abstraction. The good, the bad, and the ugly. There are trees, dreams, sunrises, Feyerabend tells us, as there are thunderstorms, shadows, rivers, wars, flea bites, love affairs, lives. God's entire galaxies. It is a blessing, not a drawback, he adds, that only a tiny fraction of this extraordinary abundance affects our minds. A super conscious organism would not be super wise. It would be paralyzed. To support this claim, Feyerabend recalls the case of one of A.R. Luria's patients whose greater than normal awareness of nuances made it impossible for him to recognize human faces. To survive, he blocked off large numbers of details, trying to boil his perceptions down to the essential characteristics of faces. Without simplification, we could not manage to deal with dangers and illnesses, nor take advantage of opportunities. In this, Feyerabend is correct. Perception involves, to a large extent, pragmatic simplification. In adopting an evolutionary perspective on conscious experiences, we come to realize V.S. Johnston tells us that they are properties of the nervous system that have been selected because they amplify and discriminate between attributes of the world that are biologically important. These discriminations, just as Feyerabend holds, are central to learning and reasoning. there are also unavoidably distortions For example, they take extremely small differences in wavelengths between, say, green and red, and turn them into sharply different experience of color. As it turns out, green covers the range of wavelengths reflected by chlorophyll molecules when illuminated by white light. In this particular case, perceptual exaggeration provides a happy solution to basic survival problems of diurnal animals that depend on a chlorophyll-based food chain on a planet that possesses particular atmospheric conditions. Similar, plausible, philosophical and scientific considerations can be adduced in favor of Feyerabend's remarks about the considerable merit of simplification and abstraction in everyday thinking and in science. But there is a rub. Abstractions, he explains, remove the particulars that distinguish an object from another. Experiments go further by removing the links that tie every process to its surroundings. They create an artificial and somewhat impoverished environment and explore its peculiarities. Locking things up from the totality that surrounds us, he admits, has often been very useful. Interestingly enough, he says, however, the remains are called, yes, real, which means they are regarded as more important than the totality itself. Maybe we can have the text up a bit, please. Thank you. This is the problem that intellectuals create when they reify the results of an otherwise sensible process. The problem is made worse in Western philosophy and science when the totality is described as having two parts. A hidden real world and a concealing, disturbing veil around it. In religious context, this dichotomy may be combined with or give rise to a second dichotomy between good and evil. The most extreme example of the reification of abstraction seems to be that of Parmenides, who argued that only being exists and that change is an illusion. Since the only possible change of being is into non-being, but non-being does not exist. There can be no change. By analogous reasoning, being can have no subdivisions, hence being is continuous. Thus, says Feyerabend, for Parmenides, neither tradition nor experience provides reliable knowledge. This was the clearest and most radical separation of the domains which later on were called reality and appearance. It was also the first and most concise theory of knowledge. Feyerabend urges those who find Parmenides' arguments primitive and linguistically absurd to consider how many modern scientists repeat his general ideas without his rigor and coherence. Nineteenth century point mechanics posited a real world without colors, smells, etc. And in a relativistic world, events are laid out in advance. Here the world, he quotes H. Weil, simply is. It does not happen. Only to the gaze of my consciousness, crawling upward along the lifeline of my body. Does a section of this world come to life as a fleeting image in space, which continuously changes in time. And then Einstein. For us who are convinced physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future has no other meaning than that of illusion, though a tenacious one. The trouble, Feyerabend argues, is that convinced physicists are also, can we have the text up, please? Convinced physicists are also convinced empiricists. But how can experiments which occur in time and are therefore illusions tell us about a reality that is beyond all illusions? Moving time and change in general to the domain of consciousness does not help, while it seems to me. Having the gaze of my consciousness crawl upward along the lifeline of my body assumes an untenable dualism and is inconsistent with the findings in neuropsychology. This is not the place, however, to argue that certain theories of time depend on a bad philosophy of mind. Suffice it to say that Weil's view seems to make questionable philosophical and scientific assumptions, and thus appears to lack, as Feyerabend claims, Parmenides' rigor and coherence. To avoid misunderstandings, I would like to stress again 2 points. The first is that Feyerabend does not fault scholars because variety disappears when subjected to scholarly analysis. Anyone who tries to make sense of a puzzling sequence of events is forced to introduce ideas that are not in the events themselves, but put them in perspective There's no escape. Understanding a subject means transforming it, lifting it out of a natural habitat and inserting it into a model or a theory or a poetic account of it. What Feyerabend objects to is the commitment to the results of this procedure of abstraction as reality. To the exclusion not only of other abstractions, but of features of experience that may be important to us for many sorts of reasons. This elevation into the world of ideas that was now being called the real world ignored such features as irrelevant, unreal, or subjective details. But despite the considerable intellectual and practical merit of the abstract procedures, the details did not therefore cease to exist. Just as people don't cease to have a nose when being weighed. Very good. The second point is that Feyerabend's plea for abundance is not the first step towards the kind of relativism that perhaps many of his old critics might expect. There may be many different ways of abstraction to simplify and transform abundance. But he says one transformation may be better than another in the sense that it permits or even explains what for the other transformation remains an unsolvable puzzle. Let us return now to the reification of abstraction Feyerabend considers the main arguments that can be given in favor of this move, and he finds them wanting, as we will see in the next section. But he also points out that there are alternative notions of reality that do not lead us to categorize as illusory what most human beings may find eminently sensible. Early Chinese thinkers took variety at face value. And for Aristotle, natural is what always or almost always that's a good one. Natural is what happens always or almost always. Compared to the laws of today. The Chinese concentration on the particular resulted in many valuable astronomical and historical reports, while the Aristotelians emphasize the local characters of regularities. More importantly, Aristotle's notion, which is intermediate between the extremes of Parmenides, objective reality, and the subjective approach in common sense philosophy. Depended on the nature, on the achievements, and especially on the interests of humans. Aristotle, for example, mocks the Platonic version of the good itself. The physician does not try to find health in itself, but the health of human beings, or perhaps even the health of an individual. For he heals the individual a variety of similar considerations led him to conclude that the abstract Platonic good is not what we should look for. Feyerabend, in sympathy with Aristotle, suggests that we regard as real those things which play an important role in the kind of life we prefer. For Aristotle, change was a prominent feature in our lives that he was not prepared to give up. And thus he opposed Plato and found Parmenides absurd. Before considering a multitude of notions of reality, however, let us see what Feyerabend has to say on the arguments that the philosophical tradition may offer to support the conclusion that the abstract is the real. Abstraction as reality. The arguments. The conclusion that the view of the world that results from abstraction is real could be established in three main ways: experience, reason, and excellence of results. I will take them up in the reverse order. I will be able to consider only a small fraction of the many arguments Feyerabend marshals against each of these possible avenues of support. Put a little pause here. Excellence of results. Today, it may seem to us that science has a prodigious power of performance. It is difficult, for example, not to be impressed by the explanatory power and increasingly, I may add, the practical power of Einstein's theory of relativity, which assumes a theory of time in consonance with Parmenides' approach to abstraction and reality. Moreover, science fills our lives with a great many technological products that would not exist except as applications of, say, quantum physics or Maxwell's theory of electromagnetism. To put the point somewhat crudely, but effectively, how could views that do not capture reality yield such a harvest of results? Let us think about the reasoning involved here. We go from good results to claims about reality. But the method of extraction was accepted by Western intellectuals long before they could point to any such results. How did it happen? Feyerabend asks. That the colorful, abundant world that affects us in so many ways was divided into two large domains. One that still contains some life, while the other lacks almost all the properties and events that makes our existence importance. Why should we have accepted that that measure of reality against Aristotle's notion that reality should be measured by human existence, or more specifically, a well-established practice, not a theory? Empirical success could not have been the reason, he tells us, for it arose and became important only much later. Some philosophers would point out that since those views do yield great results now, we are justified now in believing that they capture reality, or at least come close to it. Besides, they might argue obtaining good results may not be a necessary condition for ascription of reality, but do provide a sufficient condition. Feyerabend, however, points out that the excellence of results is a matter of judgment, and that, at least as far as practical results are concerned, non-scientific cultures also provided acceptable lives for their members, while the imposition of Western ideas and practices often disturb the delicate balance with nature they had achieved. I will invite the readers to consult Feyerabend's case for this assertion on their own, for I will concentrate on a different philosophical move open to him. Quantum theory tells us is one of the best confirmed theories we possess. That is one of the most empirically successful theories. And he may add, one that has produced spectacular practical results. And yet, in its official interpretation, it implies that properties once regarded as objective depend on which the way the world is being approached. What this means is that if excellence of results entitle us to make determinations about ontology, quantum theory, a decidedly anti-realist view in its orthodox interpretation, should allow us to draw conclusions hostile to realism. That goes for what many consider the most successful scientific view of modern science. In the ancient and medieval world, the most successful view was Ptolemaic astronomy, and it too, in its official version, claimed to tell us nothing about what the world was really like. It would seem to be an ad hoc at this point to amend the argument from the excellence of results to include only such views that claim to tell us what the world is like and are also very successful. Even that would not help much. The two-sphere model of the universe was extremely successful for a time and had vast practical consequences for fields such as navigation. But today, we think it's false, and one of many false views that have been successful for a time. These last examples are mine own. Feyerabend's main point is that many opposing views have achieved excellence of results, but it would be absurd to conclude that they all constitute reality. And then I will have a little go through. Well, there is a lot to choose of here. And as I said initially, and also Gonzalo Munevar, there's a problem of abstraction. We abstract the book, and I abstract what Munevar and Feyerabend says. But notwithstanding that, there's still many interesting things here. Page 2. "18 lines from the bottom. Experiments go further by removing the link that tie every process to its surroundings." More to the bottom. Yeah, that's it. they create an artificial and somewhat impoverished environment and explore its peculiarities, blocking things off from the totality that surrounds us. He admits has often been very useful. Interestingly enough, he says, however, the remains are called real, which means they are regarded as more important than the totality itself. So out goes totality, in goes particularity and generality. And in the end, the next step, reductionism, we reconstruct, so to speak, the reality, the totality from the particularities by adding atoms. And we all get a feeling, this is also well put, the problem is made worse in Western philosophy and science when the totality is described as having two parts, a hidden real world and a concealing, disturbing veil around it. This is very troublesome, of course. Common man has lost access to reality. And we get forced to believe in something that we cannot experience, the abstraction. And I think a further argument to be added there, the abstraction was made for a purpose, technological progress. Why should it depict reality in some way? At the end, about 10 lines up from bottom of page 3. Further down, it's like 12 lines from the bottom. And here is an important point. The trouble, Feyerabend argues, is that convinced physicists are also convinced empiricists. So they have a side work as being empiricists. And I think that holds true for quite some time now. They're having two works. And the second one, the empiricist, is actually a philosophical work. And then we go a bit down. After the parenthesis with 12. Bit up. There is no escape. Understanding a subject means transforming it, lifting it out of a natural habitat and inserting it into a model or a theory or a poetic account of it. This is how it works. Doesn't make it real. It's to have one subject or object taken out put into a protective shield and then separated, understood separately. There's a fantastic comparisons to Plato and Platonic tendencies to see the abstractions as even more real than the perceived reality. Ten lines down on page 4. Natural is what happens always or almost always. That's something that we most definitely can compare to Jacob, Cangelham, Bernard, where it's mechanical, doesn't have any deviations, it's absolutely certain without no exception whatsoever. This is not the case, but thanks to the abstractions, this is what we today perceive or live in. And 3 lines down, Aristotelians emphasize the local character of regularities. And this is exactly what we have. It's a perceived local regularity, but it's not a regularity that goes over the whole. I would say reality as such is global, not local. As now also claimed by quantum physicists Alain Specht, Seilinger, and Clauser, won the Nobel Prize, delivered to them the 10th of December last year. Reality is global, the whole thing, not a conglomeration of separated parts put together and said to be reality. And then we have, and I'm just going to read this is further down, different arguments. Excellence of results is one, which is absolutely true. And I really like this point theory, where there's not even colors or anything. It's the most extreme case of abstraction. But this is true. The last sentence is obvious. Let us think about the reasoning involved here. We go from good results to claims about reality. That's the move. It's more or less the same move that Derrida deconstructs in life, death. But the method of abstraction was accepted by Western intellectuals long before they could point to any such results. And I think that furthers the argument or the clarification. It makes it even more to the point. And Feyerabend asks, and that's the next page, that the rich and colorful and abundant world that affect us in so many ways was divided into two large domains. One that still contains some life, while the other lacks almost all the properties and events that make our existence important. And this is more or less where we are now at this stage. We take away all the details, all the understanding that are important. We infuse that on everything. We force the machine model, and that hides all the important things. Bernard Kangelhan was trying to do the same, blocking out life. Telos, go, blocking out randomness, blocking out what is interesting, odd, peculiar. And I would say many of the writers we took up in the Bible section tried to get rid of interesting details on coins and similar, and just have an original, sort of abstracted truth. It's either a conglomerate of many things or just one thing, where using mechanistic theories we take away what sort of sticks up, that doesn't have this streamlined thing. And of course, now come the harder arguments. I think they need to be re-emphasized. Line 24. Quantum theory, it begins with, is just 2 lines under 239. Quantum theory, he tells us, is one of the best confirmed theories we possess, one of the most empirically successful theories. And he may add one that has produced spectacular practical results. And yet, in its official interpretation, it implies that properties once regarded as objective depend on the way in which the world is being approached. Do you want to measure a wave or a particle? None seem to be aware of this, that even quantum theory, present physics, is looking for the particulars, not generalities. The atom model, which is from 1914, is mentioned in the text, but even Bohr saw that as a generalization. And his son screamed, as I said so many times to his doctors, do not see it as an existence. That is to be understood, that it has much more particular qualities in different cases that needs to be taken care of, taken into consideration. The beauty of it is we learn more when we take in the particularities. It becomes a much richer world. And in the end, we will also be able to have universals if they are soundly founded on this plenitude, this pluralism, this broader ground. We will be more able to be specific, universal, and all that. We will not lose anything, which is, I think, is very important, because relativism is not a trap you want to fall into, and I'm, in my case, sure that this is not pointing to relativism. It's rather longish here. Maybe some comments from Kalle?
Yes, let me continue what you said here. And quantum theory, you have said that quantum theory looks for particularities, not for generalities. That was your explanation, Hans. But we should define that, we should emphasize that particularities does not mean local, because that was the trap of Aristotle. For Aristotle, real was local, and quantum, the Nobel Prize for quantum physics, as you said, Hans, proved that reality is global. The Nobel Prize proved that Aristotle was wrong. How was he wrong? Aristotle claimed that there are only local regularities, and that was it. So when you, Hans, said that quantum physics looks for particularities, we should emphasize that particularities does not mean local things. Did I understand it correctly?
Yes, yes, it's very good.
What do you mean really with particularities?
Congratulations, very
Yes.
good. Particulars doesn't necessarily mean local. No, exactly.
Please tell me as a synonym for particularities, what do you mean with particularities in contrast to generalities?
It is very complicated in this case, because I think Feyerabend uses Aristotle to show we can get result from the local, but as long as we see it in, so to speak, in parentheses, not seeing it as 100% real, using those factors, so to speak, isolated. But that's not reality. That's another thing.
Absolutely.
And this was the same conclusion, actually, of Mr. Aspect, Clauser, and Salinger, that local reality doesn't exist, but we can still use it. But it's not reality as such, but the empiricist reality.
I believe that this phrase, that properties once regarded as objective, dependent the way in which the word is being approached, is the most significant so far in this text.
Yes.
So let me paraphrase it. Objective is in contrast to subjective, of course. So in this phrase, you have actually the subjective interwoven with objective and vice versa.
Yes.
And when you say when the word is being approached, of course, it's the subjective that comes in. So that is the... and this text is also speaking about the dichotomy between theory and practice. So people say if it works in practice, then that should be the rule, that's the reality. And practice is in some way implied as being objective. Practice would be objective in one way, and theory is related to the I. So that would be something suspicious. The I is something suspicious because it's subjective. Practice is the supposedly objective thing, but as we saw in this phrase, objective is only a thing in which the world is being approached. So this is the
There is an example that could be helpful from the book. I will have it tomorrow, but from Brunelleschi and the invention of the central perspective. And he used the box to construct it. But already within a few decades, the box was forgotten, that the box is what constructs the central perspective. And we start viewing actually the central perspective as reality. And this is very similar to what happened with classical physics, and that it made us accept these abstractions as being more real than the totality and the perceived reality or practice, as you say.
Let me take up one last side note. This is with about the. This was a new name for me. I don't know, perhaps you are already familiar. How do you pronounce this last name, by the way? Herman Weyl?
I pronounce it the English way, Weil.
Weil
or Weil.
Was he important? Do you think Weil? He's mentioned in the article.
Yeah, I heard his name before, yeah. It's like in between, so to speak. Herman Weil, yeah.
Herman Weil. Okay, I will only scroll this Wikipedia page. Please stop me if you see something. After about 1928, Weil had apparently decided that mathematical intuitionism was not compatible with his influence for the phenomenological philosophy Husserl, as he had apparently earlier thought. In the last decades of his life, Weil emphasized, mathematics as symbolic construction, and moved to a position closer not only to Hilbert, but to that of Ernst Cassirer, where however rarely refers to Cassirer. Interesting.
It's very interesting. There's a mention that he was interested in intuitionism. And that specific take on mathematics is accepting particulars and ignoring or trying to not overuse the law of the excluded middle, which is so common today.
Absolutely. I wanted to find the quotation text while only the case of consciousness crawling upward along is the lifeline of my body does section of this world come to life as a fleeting image in space which continues to change in time. So everything is an illusion according to Wilde. And they also it's also deterministic. Yes, for Wilde, if I understood it correctly. Okay, perhaps we should leave it there, Hans.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Kalle. And thank you all for listening and participating. Have a beautiful morning, afternoon, or night, or wherever you are time-wise. And here I end.